All right, so today we're going to kind of talk about good and evil and try to wrap our brains around that whole thing about why. Why did God do it this way? Couldn't he have just made us good and never gave Adam and Eve that choice? I mean, wouldn't that have been better than to have had one rule that would have given the potential that these people would have just chosen to not do what God said? Wouldn't it have been better? And that's the thing, is we think we know better than God how he should have done it. But when we really stop and look at it, we realize that his way is a lot better than our way would have been. There is a God who created in love and then pursued a creation he gave free will to. I tend to think about it like this. If there's a God who is loving, who created us to have a relationship with him, he wouldn't force us to love him. If he forced us to love him, we'd be like robots. That's all we would be. And that wouldn't be love. I mean, think about it. I'm married. Would I have wanted to marry somebody who was forced to love me? Absolutely not. Would you? No. You want to have somebody who has made the choice to love you. Well, that's exactly what God wanted. He wanted to create man, and he wanted them to love him. Not because they were forced to. That wouldn't be love. What is that? Slavery, really. So he created us with a free will. He said, you know what? I'm going to make it that they can choose to love me or not. But in choosing, that meant if God gave us a free will, we could choose not to. What kind of a risk was that? And yet God felt like it was worth the risk. Not only was it worth the risk, he knew we were very curious creatures, and we would find ourselves in a boat we wish we weren't. Think about it. Adam and Eve. Here's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Here's a snake that has told them that if you eat of that, you'll be like God. Interesting that he says that, because what did God already say? I made man in my image. We were already made in the image of God. We didn't need to be made like God. But the devil told Adam and Eve, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you'll be like God. And they thought, that sounds cool. And so they're deceived. They're deceived into thinking that that's a good idea. It wasn't really that they didn't love God. It's just that they didn't think that obedience was part of love. It is. Have you ever noticed that? When you obey your parents, it's part of loving them, isn't it? Man is deceived into believing the lie that he will be like God if he eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God is not back there going, oh dear, what have I done? I've opened up this possibility that they could not choose me, and now they've not chosen me. What am I going to do? That's not how God was. Instead, God was like this. He knew ahead of time that we would do that we would choose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He knew we would. And so before he even created man, he had a plan in place of what to do to fix that problem to anybody who would want a relationship with him. And now there's a free will still. And the problem is solved in the death of Jesus Christ. So that anyone who does in free will choose to love God and have a relationship with him can. That's exactly what he wanted. So let's recap and make sure that we understand this. So we have a God who gives us a free will. He doesn't want to force us to love him. If he forced us to love him, that wouldn't be love. On the other hand, if he created us and gave us free will so that we could choose to love him or not, then what would happen if we chose not to love him? When God created man, he gave them a choice. And that one choice was to seek after the knowledge of good and evil on their own, or to keep the pure relationship with good we originally had. We, mankind, thanks to Adam and Eve, chose to have the knowledge of good and evil. Evil isn't just something a good God created. Evil is the opposite of good. Kind of like darkness is the absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. A loving God allowed the free will choice to seek this knowledge. We are the ones that brought evil into the good world that God created. Before that fateful day, there was no evil. Everything was good. After the end of every day of creation, God ends it by saying, and it is good. Every single day. And when he created man, he ended with, and it is very good. So there was no evil at all until man chose to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When that good God gave us the choice to bring into his good creation the knowledge of evil, he didn't just step away to leave us to wallow in our misery. Instead, he stepped into it. He stepped right into the mess that we had created. He stepped in with us and allowed us to kill him. That's amazing when you stop and think about it. It's a mess we made, and there was no way of us ever solving that problem. There was no way of us ever cleaning the mess up. The only one that could have is if the God that created the whole thing was to come and take care of that mess. And he did. He came and he died. He allowed us to kill him, the worst, most evil act of all. That loving God made a way to fix the mess we made. He gave us a way to reconcile ourselves to him and to choose to love him again. And that's the amazing thing about the knowledge of good and evil. So I want you to think about the fact that God loved us enough to not just create us as robots and force us to love him, and not to leave us in our misery if we chose to not love him, but to give us a chance to realize that what we're missing out on is that relationship with him. That's what eternal life is all about. And he gives it back to those who decide that that is what they want, is a relationship with God.